Welcome to day 6 of the 2022 challenge. This week we're looking at theory and methods. For those of you who are new to the videos, what we do is I set a question first thing in the morning for AQA A-level sociology. I set 20 marks worth of questions, so this week we're setting two 10-mark questions, and then through the day I post some hints, and around about between 7 and 10 o'clock of an evening I will post a video to show you how I've answered the questions, and I will also upload a digital copy of my answers to my website, thesociologyguide.com. So today's questions, they're pretty tough questions to look at. Outline and explain 2 reasons sociologists may prefer to use primary research methods when investigating sociological issues is a bit of a tough question. What it's doing here is it's combining 2 different kind of spec points, if you like. One looking at the idea of primary and secondary data, and another one looking at what influences a researcher's choice of topic and methods. So what type of researcher is most likely to use primary methods? Why might they use primary methods? What motivates them to use primary methods? This is what we're looking at in this question. Second question, outline and explain 2 explanations why sociology should be used to inform social policy. Now, often we get the sociology and social policy debate essay for 20 markers. It has been asked, I think, 2 reasons why sociology does not inform social policy, and that's certainly one I did in the 40-day challenge a couple of years ago. But I've flipped it around a little bit and looked at 2 explanations as to why sociology should be used to inform social policy. Let's look at my responses. Let's look at some of the information that I sent out during the day today. So first of all, I sent out this sheet which looked at reasons why researchers might choose primary or secondary data. Now, the kind of interesting thing with this question is reasons why people may choose primary research methods is not only can you talk about why they might use primary research methods, but you can also talk about why they won't use secondary sources of information, and you'd probably be credited for that. I don't write the exam questions, I don't write the mark schemes, so that's just a very hypothetical thing I'm saying, that you'd be credited for saying why they don't use secondary data and why they prefer primary data because of the limitations of secondary data. But I would see that as being a reasonable argument to put forward. If we look at here, we've got primary data collection is better suited to meet the needs of the researchers. They're able to operationalize the research methodology to suit their needs, so things like definitions, and making sure that they've got the correct definitions. As researchers are aware of the specific methods of collecting data, they know how it's being collected. They are able to record these, test the results with a different sample and check reliability. So if you want to be a little bit more scientific, you know the method, you can then go and take it and administer that method to another sample. So for example, if it's question A, you can give it to one sample, then you can give it to another sample, and it can help you to check your reliability. And also researchers are able to select participants that meet the specific criteria they're looking for based upon social characteristics or experiences, and this gives them greater validity. If they want to go and look at, say for example, the LGBTQ community, they know specifically that is dealing with the sample they're selecting is from that community. If they want to go and look at working class students, they will know how to define a working class student, so that's an advantage of primary data. Secondary data, I've put some advantages of secondary data here. So it enables researchers to collect information for a period of time that reflects social changes in society. So for example, Thomas and Zanecki looked at letters back home to Poland from Polish migrants who went to the USA. It's a specific time period in society, and it'd be very difficult to actually interview anybody from that time period, but they looked at those and they found out about the experiences of Polish migrants into the USA. Personal documents are not written for sociological purposes, and so will not often reflect the individual's true feelings and motivations, rather than being influenced by researchers. Now, this is true of things like official statistics as well. Official statistics can be manipulated. We know that they can have a political motive. We know that the definitions can be very restrictive, so that certain things like crime rates or poverty are presented in a better light, so that people may vote for the government again. Secondary data may be more readily available and easier to analyse than primary data. Statistics are readily available on many different sociological issues, so it's very easy to get this data. That could be a problem for primary researchers though. There's a lot of data out there, but does it necessarily meet their needs? Let's look at my response. So, one reason why sociologists may prefer to use primary research methods when investigating sociological issues is their methodological perspective. Now, this is something that might come up in the choosing topics and methods. Certain sociologists like to use certain types of methods, and I've used an example here. For example, interpretivist sociologists look to gain an insight into the lives of individuals and uncover the meanings and motivations behind their actions. To do so, they rely upon primary qualitative methods that are high in validity, such as unstructured interviews and observations. These allow them to gain in-depth information on specific issues. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken an example to show that I understand why people would pick primary research methods. Whilst this type of data may be provided by secondary sources, so we might get qualitative data from secondary sources, researchers using primary methods are able to ask follow-up questions if something is not clear, or take the research into different directions than it had initially thought if something of interest occurs. Now I'm going to use an example. So I'm going to use an example of a primary qualitative research that was done by Paul Willis. For example, using primary methods such as observations and group interviews, Paul Willis was able to uncover the motivations of the lads in his study as wanting to enjoy their last days at school before going to the world of work, rather than assuming that they were anti-school if he had relied upon secondary sources such as school reports. So there was an advantage to Willis using these primary methods, and that's what I've kind of outlined here briefly. As a result, he was able to gain an insight into the true motivations for their behaviours and challenge existing ideas about pupils being passive puppets. So there's an impact of it. The outline and explain questions, the research methods ones, don't require any evaluation. You can evaluate if you choose to do so because it is a high order skill and it will be rewarded as such, but you're not going to lose, you never lose marks, but you're not missing out if you do not evaluate in them. But evaluation can be a form of analysis, if that makes sense. A second reason sociologists may prefer to use primary research methods when investigating sociological issues is to ensure greater validity of their findings. Many secondary sources are designed for uses other than sociological research and so do not always reflect the interests of the sociologists studying them. For example, official statistics on poverty and deprivation were seen by Townsend in his research as not reflecting the true nature of poverty in the UK. So what I've done here is I've not only have explained why they might not use secondary sources, why they would use primary research, but I've also given an example of it. As a result, Townsend designed his own deprivation index that looked at relative deprivation and used primary research methods in order to collate the data from a number of towns and cities. Secondary sources like official statistics can be subject to manipulation for political purposes and so will not reflect the true nature of the issues sociologists look to investigate, and therefore the use of primary methods will provide them with more valid data based upon the definitions that the sociologist uses in their research. So in a way, I've taken a point of negative point about secondary sources and a positive point of primary sources, primary research methods, and I've made a comparison between the two. And this is why people may prefer to use primary research methods, is because they are certain of the definitions. They know that the definitions fit their purposes. Let's look at our second question. Our second question was a little bit more difficult. It talked about ways in which sociology should inform social policy. Now, there's a range of different thinkers who've been involved in social policy or had very strong ideas on why sociology should inform social policy. If we start with the earliest, which is likes of Durkheim and Comte, the early positivists believed that by studying society scientifically, that sociology could provide solutions to social issues. Townsend, who we just mentioned in the previous question, took a social democratic approach. They suggested that sociologists should be involved in researching social problems. Professor Brewer, who was the chairman of the British Sociological Association about 10 years ago, suggested that sociology needs to be used in addressing conflicts, and I think his work was centred a lot around conflict generally. I think he was very much involved in peace studies. Zygmunt Bauman, a late modernist, argued that sociology was uniquely placed to advise on sociological issues, and if we didn't use sociology, things would get worse. Now, from that, you start to see sort of like people like Anthony Giddens, who also was a late modern thinker. He was involved with the new Labour government throughout their government from 1997 to 2010, and he helped develop what's called third way politics, a mix of kind of social interventionism and neoliberal economics. So what they tried to do is they tried to tackle some of the social problems that existed in society whilst also developing the economy. We could also put in here some realist thinkers. So your right realism, your left realism, you could talk about those. They thought that sociology could help solve the real problems of crime. So you could use the likes of Murray, you could use the likes of Wilson and Kelling's broken windows theory. You could use Lee and Young and sort of like how this should tackle, how sociology should help tackle social issues. Another way sociology also contributes is through indirectly through research councils, universities, inclusion on think tanks. Sociologists are often tasked in writing reports that will then go on to generate policies, and the Black Report is an example of that, which I'm going to use in my response. So here is my response. What I've done is I've knitted together Bauman and Giddens here to talk about how Bauman thinks sociology should be used, and then backing that up by talking about how Giddens did use it. So one explanation for why sociology should inform social policy is put forward by Bauman. He suggested that sociology was ideally placed to investigate social issues and for this information to be fed back to government who could formulate policies and address these issues. Bauman focused on the usefulness of sociology in investigating poverty and welfare, and these ideas were expanded upon by Anthony Giddens, who assisted New Labour in drawing up their manifesto in the late 1990s. Giddens, as an advisor to New Labour, was successful in implementing sociological ideas into social policy, and this enabled the development of third-way politics, emerging social security for those most in need, with neoliberal economic policy to provide economic development. This illustrates the usefulness of sociology in informing social policy, as policies such as Sure Start, EMA and education reforms were introduced on the back of sociological research. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice slightly here today. Let's look at the second response. Again, with the second response, what I've done is I've talked about positivism, and then I've talked about, and I've linked that in then to some of the research that was done by Townsend and the Black Report. A second explanation for why sociology should be used to inform social policy is put forward by positivists. Early positivists such as Comte and Durkheim saw the scientific study of society as a way in which social issues could be tackled. They proposed that through examining social facts in an objective manner, that solutions could be found for many of the social issues of the day. Whilst later positivists distanced themselves from these ideas, and that was true, later positivists started to look at sociology scientifically, but they didn't think that it would serve the purposes of social policy. The use of quantitative data and objective measures of issues such as poverty has been undertaken by sociologists on behalf of governments. We're going to go back to Townsend again. For example, Townsend examined the scale of poverty in the UK, devising his own scale of relative deprivation, which is still used in some quarters. Furthermore, sociologists are often asked to collate and review data in order to report to government on what should be done to address social issues. For example, the Black Report. Now, the Black Report was a report that was done into conditions of poverty, particularly in terms of housing. I think it was in the early 1980s, but it was rejected because of the sheer cost of the Black Report for it to implement. Instead, Thatcher's government decided to sell off most of the council houses rather than invest in spending in them. Furthermore, sociologists are used indirectly by governments through compiling data for the Office of National Statistics and other research centres. This echoes the ideas of early positivists in using sociology to investigate wide-ranging social issues such as inequality and poverty. Okay, these were two tough questions. I've got to admit, I'm always of the mind that if you can tackle the tough questions, the other questions that are a little bit more straightforward are going to fill you with confidence. You know, the idea that you can tackle really tough questions. Tomorrow we've got two questions here. Now, there's been a little bit of a trend recently when they ask about strengths and limitations of a method to talk about either a practical limitation, an ethical limitation, or a theoretical limitation or strength of using a specific method, or even a little bit more broader. There's been a few where it's gone out and explained two theoretical limitations of using primary qualitative data, for example. So I've put the first question, outline and explain two practical limitations of using observations in sociological research. Now, of course, practical limitations, these are things like the time it's going to take, the access to participants, how it's going to be funded, the opportunity to conduct the research, lots of logistical problems. So with using observations, now again, it says observations, doesn't say any specific type of observation. So this could be participant or non-participant. It could be overt or covert. You could go down the route of talking about some of the problems with establishing a cover as one reason, and then another practical limitation of you doing observations could be the time scale in which it takes to do that. A good response to that will use an example that you've come across from the specification or from your studies of theory and methods, and we'll use that to prove the limitation, to show the limitation, to illustrate it. Second question, outline and explain two reasons why sociological research cannot be value free. Again, it's a debate question. Usually we talk about the debate as being, is sociology value free or is it value laden? This one is asking you why sociology cannot be value free, why sociology cannot be objective, why values will always interfere. There's lots of different things that you can put into that one, lots of different ways in which values influence sociological research. And I'm going to send out some stuff on value freedom tomorrow. So hopefully you're getting on well through sort of like these challenges. We're on to day 7 now, which means just another 48 days of doing this. We have now answered 17 out of 125 questions. Hopefully you're liking these videos. Please do. I will try and remember to say it this time. Like and subscribe, and you will get notified when all of the other videos become available. If you've not started, if you're not doing the 2022 challenge and you're just watching this as part of your revision, check out the other videos, because I'm trying to cover the entire specification, the information on there that is not been given to you by AQA already, what's called the advanced information. I'm trying to cover the other little bits. So it doesn't matter which topic you are going to be studying, by the time the exams come, there'll be stuff on culture and identity, media, beliefs, global development, crime, all of the different topic areas that you could cover, even the little ones like health and work, poverty and welfare that are a little bit more niche. That's it for day 6. Hopefully I'll see you on day 7. Thanks for watching.